The big question coming out of UFC 287 last night is who should Israel Adesanya fight next? But I think in order to do that, we got to figure out what's going on with Alex Pereira. My name is James Lynch. In today's video, I'm going to give you a couple different options on who I think Pereira should fight next based off the information we have at hand. And the first bit of information, which I think is a key detail here, is Dana White saying flat out at the presser, and credit to BJ Penn for writing this up. Let me just zoom in here a little bit. Dana White saying, I assume he moves up to light heavyweight, referring to Alex Pereira. Now, the weight cut for Alex Pereira was a big talking point last night. Pereira losing in the UFC for the very first time, knocked out as well. Some people feel like the weight cut, with it being too much, was made him more susceptible to getting knocked out there because it was kind of a shot that came out of nowhere that actually knocked him out. So there's some question, should this be the last fight for Alex Pereira at middleweight? It seems like the UFC is kind of going that way already with Alex Pereira, because last night on my stream, a lot of people said, hey, you got to do the trilogy between Adesanya, Pereira. They're 1-1 now in MMA. Only makes sense to do the trilogy. But I just get the sense from this quote and this video we saw last night too. Check it out. The UFC posted it. It's just Israel Adesanya and Pereira talking about, you know, kind of burying the hatchet, and Israel Adesanya also mentioning about how he wants to go to Brazil and train with Alex Pereira as well. It kind of seems like the UFC has moved on from Alex Pereira at middleweight, and I mentioned this on my stream last night as well. What's better for business? What's better for business is having Adesanya as the middleweight champion. You're giving him a guy again in Pereira who at any point can end the fight with the knockout. It's a bit risky for them. So I think it's probably in the best interest of the UFC, or at least that's what I gather from their point of view, that Pereira does move up, because again, if Adesanya is the champion at middleweight, that's better for business, so to speak. So like I said, the information we got right now does suggest that Pereira will move up to 205 pounds. So the question is, who would he fight at 205? I've got two different scenarios here. So we're going to look first at scenario number one, which is the fact that we've got Jamal Hill as light heavyweight champion. Who does he fight next? So the big question is Yuri Prochazka going to come back in time to fight Jamal Hill? I know Jamal, I believe, gave April as a deadline in terms of if he's going to make that decision on if it's going to be Yuri next or someone else. We still don't know what's going on. Let's assume that Yuri is not going to be next for Jamal Hill, because he still needs time to recover. Again, it was a pretty serious injury. He vacated the title. There's some school of thought that Yuri should probably take his time before coming back. So if Jamal doesn't fight Yuri Prochazka next, who does he fight? Some people may say it should be Pereira. I disagree. He's coming off a knockout loss. He should not be getting a title shot off that. And yes, I know he's a former champion, but he didn't even have one successful title defense. That should not give him the opportunity to fight for the 205-pound title, no matter how interested people are in the fight. I know Hill will fight anyone. That's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about merit, and I just don't think Pereira has earned that spot to fight Jamal Hill yet. So the opponent for me that I think makes a lot of sense, I wish I had a drum roll here, but I don't. I think the obvious choice here for Pereira at 205 is Alexander Rakic. Okay, if you look at the rankings right now, Rakic is ranked number 4. That's a top 5 opponent here. Rakic is kind of waiting around right now. Of course, he had a weird fight in his last one against Jan Blachowicz, in a fight that I thought was fairly even, and then obviously ended in a leg injury here. I think Rakic is a very promising guy in that weight class. I think that fight makes a lot of sense. You know, Rakic has got pretty good stand-up. Can he take an Alex Pereira punch? We'll have to see. I think stylistically it would be a very fun fight here, and I think it's one of the perfect matchups for him at 205, because it doesn't really impact anyone else here, right, in terms of the opponents. You could also argue maybe Jan Blachowicz would be a better opponent there too. Jan hinting at maybe fighting at 185, so you don't want to take that off the table for Adesanya next. If he does have a title defense, could be Jan Blachowicz. So I think Rakic is a safe bet here. He's 31 years old. I think that's a pretty good opponent for him if he was to come up to 205. So that's opponent number one that I think could make some sense here for Pereira, assuming he is going to light heavyweight next. The second opponent I think that makes sense, and this would be the scenario that Yuri Prochazka does come back and does fight Jamal Hill in time this year so he can have that title defense. To me, it's an absolute no-brainer. It's got to be Magomed Ankalaev. Now, look, I know there's going to be people saying that, hey, Alex Pereira does not deserve to fight Ankalaev. I could see people saying that because some people feel like Ankalaev should get the title shot. Just like I mentioned there, I think, again, if Yuri does not fight Jamal Hill, I think Ankalaev is the obvious choice here. Now, he went to a draw with Jan Blachowicz. I personally thought he won that fight. I think a lot of people would agree with that. Ankalaev should be fighting for the title next, but you saw the UFC, they didn't even mention Ankalaev as the next opponent for fighting Glover Teixeira for that vacant title fight. They mentioned Jamal Hill, which kind of came out of nowhere, and I think it speaks volumes to how the UFC thinks of Ankalaev. So I kind of have the assumption that Ankalaev may have to take another fight, and to me, Alex Pereira is the perfect opponent here. Stylistically, this would be a very interesting matchup here. We know Ankalaev can take his opponents to the ground. We know he's got good grappling, good wrestling. He's got good stand stand-up as well. Can he take down Pereira? To me, this is the most interesting matchup you could make for Alex Pereira at 205 pounds, because Ankalaev's great at, obviously getting guys to the canvas. And could he do that against Pereira? And if he can't, can he stand and trade with Alex Pereira? We'll have to see. So these are two opponents I think do make a lot of sense. Again, Ankalaev would only work if Yuri and Jamal Hill are next. If Yuri and Jamal Hill aren't next, I say give Ankalaev the title shot and you give Alexander Rakic Alex Pereira next. So that's kind of what I'm thinking. Again, like I showed you there, just to recap here, Dana White suggesting Pereira moving up to 205. We know Pereira cuts a ton of weight as it is. Remember, leading into this fight, we saw him cutting weight a couple weeks before. He got knocked out for the first time. There should be some suggestion as well that maybe the weight cut contributed to that knockout. And like I said, him and Pereira getting cozy after this really doesn't look like these two guys are going to fight again for a trilogy at middleweight, at least not anytime soon. So that's kind of what I'm thinking here is Pereira moves up to 205, and then we start to talk about other opponents for Adesanya. And I'll do a separate video on what I think could be next for Adesanya, because if Pereira is out of the equation, things get very interesting as far as a next opponent for Adesanya, who I know wants to keep active, but also he's fought most of the guys in the division already. So I want to know what you guys think in the comment section below. Who do you want to see Pereira fight next, if in fact he does go to 205 pounds? If he does fight either Ankalaev or Rakic, who do you see winning those fights? Curious to get your thoughts on that. Let me know your opinions in the comments. Always love hearing from you guys. Follow me on Twitter and on Instagram at Lynch on Sports, and make sure you subscribe to this channel, youtube.com/Lynch on Sports. I'm James Lynch. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.